I get letters, and a great many of my YouTube videos are composed in response to questions and comments sent in by viewers like you. And once in a while there's a topic, and I pause and reflect that nobody has ever asked me about it, despite the constant inflow of emails, questions I get on various social media formats. I get people telling me about the positive impact I've had in their lives, that they quit video games, or they quit drugs, or became vegan, or whatever it is, or they stopped following one cult leader or another because of the influence of my YouTube channel, because of the questions we've entertained here, the discussions we've had. The last 5 years, how many people have ever written into me wanting to talk to me about or ask me about war? How many people have ever asked me about the war? This is 2021. We're coming to the end of a significant period of history in which the war has a self-evident meaning. I remember when I was a kid, I must have been 11 years old exactly, asking my father, when people say the war, which war do they mean? Because I'd really noticed this. My father didn't know how to handle the question either. And sometimes at that they were referring to the Vietnam War in those days, and sometimes it was World War II. That was self-evidently the war, if people said that in English. Well, from September 11th, 2001 up to September 11th, 2021, it's been a self-evident meaning to the war. What about war as such? All right. This is Sallust, Sallust, one of the most famous and influential authors out of ancient Rome. Never heard anyone mention to me even once. No professor has ever quoted him to me. Never seen him cited. This shows you what kind of company I keep. Shows the low quality of intellectual discourse, frankly, among the PhD holding people in my life. I've never heard anyone, quite recently, found out about Sallust. And he opens by telling you, and this was studied by many impressionable young men for many centuries. Do you want to be a man? Do you want to live your life like a cow? Let me tell you what the difference is between being truly human and being a cow. The answer has a whole lot to do with war and conquest and empire. Virtue, yes, and the cultivation of the intellect, yes, but it is a very warlike view of what it is to be a man and what it is to be a human being, life on earth. We had this broad cultural transition, certainly punctuated by the invention of the atom bomb, from holding up war as an unquestioned and unquestionable virtue for young men, over to presenting it as a similarly unquestioned and unquestionable evil. And you may not have picked up on this on my YouTube channel, but I don't regard war as either one. I really do regard war as a meaningful and important part of politics and a meaningful and important part of life that we have to learn to examine with a certain kind of detachment that rejects both of these extremes. Why is it, you suppose, that people don't write into me asking to know what I think about the war? Why is it that so few people want to know what I have to say about the American wars in our time, given that we're really now as never before in a period of evaluating the meaning and significance of the American empire, both looking back and looking ahead? Well, for one thing, if we're talking about my audience and my, apparition here on YouTube, like the illusion of who I am in as much as my audience gets to know me, keep in mind that in the early days of this channel, there was a widespread expectation that because I was vegan, because I talked about the disasters, horrors, the atrocities of the American war in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, that I would be someone who was the staunchest peacenik imaginable, that I would be more anti-war than the stereotypical vegan hippie. And probably if you quote me in certain contexts, it may sound that way. My position on war may lend itself to that analysis. I think the biggest problem we have now in talking and thinking clearly about war in Western democracies really comes down to a habit of mind that treats capability as something quite separate from the ethical decision about what you're going to do, about what you should do, about what the right thing to do is. I've had so many debates on this channel and kind of intersecting with the work I do on this channel, which begin with someone saying, well, let me give you a hypothetical question. And they want to pose a hypothetical question that completely separates the question of what you can do from what you should do. And when we're really talking about ethics, when we're really talking about politics, whether making decisions in our own lives as individuals or on a massive scale as nations, as empires for the future of the planet as a whole, what we have to deal with precisely is the way in which what you can do is inextricably tied up with what you should do. If there is a man drowning and somebody sees him from the safety of the beach, should he jump in and swim out and attempt to rescue the drowning man? Don't you think it matters, the question of whether or not he can rescue the drowning man? What if the person on the shore who sees the drowning man has no legs? It's someone confined to a wheelchair with no legs. Do you think they're going to be able to swim out and rescue the other swimmer? Or do you think that if they swim out in the ocean, they may drown before the man they're going out to rescue? I just heard in great detail recently a guy's account of how he almost died drowning in the ocean in California. Not worth telling the tale in any detail. But 5 or 6 people were standing on the shore looking at him with their phones out, trying to figure out what to do. And then one young man who actually had lifeguard training ran up, went out, and rescued him. He was out there drowning for quite a long time, and there were these 5 or 6 kind of gawkers and onlookers, and like, well, you can call an ambulance. What do you want to do? Now, all of those people had legs. Now, the way this guy tells the story, he just says how great it is that this one young man rescued him. And he tried to give the young man money, and he refused. Like, after he'd saved his life, like, he tried to do something, and the guy refused to receive any reward for his good work or whatever. Interesting story in different ways. But the story is told in such a way that it completely ignores the onlookers who stood there and either did nothing or did almost nothing, that there was only one person who swam out to rescue you. But why does this matter? No, look, I don't know. Maybe all those people were 400 pounds overweight. Like, I don't know. I mean, there are aspects to the story I don't know. Maybe if you just saw a photograph of these people at the beach, you're like, yeah, I get it. I see why you didn't swim out, right? Capability, morality, obligation, and indeed virtue and these things, they are, they're inextricably bound up together. Precisely what we have to do is stop training ourselves to think in this hypothetical way that separates actions from abilities and consequences, that treats decisions as something that can be isolated from whether or not you actually have the capability to do the thing being discussed. Now, off the coast of Greece, there's a tiny island called Cyprus. In Greek, Kupros. It's part of the origin of our word for copper, kuprik. So it's one of the most ancient and important civilizations, not just in the history of Europe, but in the history of the world. Half of the island is occupied illegally by Turkey. Do you think that Greece should start a war with Turkey by invading the island of Cyprus and reunifying Cyprus under one government, driving out the Turks? Do you think that Greece can? Now, if you're really thinking it through, step by step, over a 5-year period, over a 20-year period. Spoilers, the Americans in Afghanistan, 20 years. The question of capability is much more important, qualitatively, not just qualitatively, than we first want to admit to ourselves. Right? Do you think that an alliance of Greece and France and Italy should combine all of their armed forces, Navy, Air Force, Land, Army, and invade the island of Cyprus and drive out the Turks? Now that seems like a very different proposition. Not because of the question of whether or not they should, but because of the question of whether or not they can. And what you may not be entirely aware of is that you're not just thinking about whether or not it's possible. You're thinking about whether or not it could be rapid, whether or not the invasion and conquest could be, so to speak, irresistible and sudden, or if it would be a situation like the Korean War, aka the Korean Civil War, where over many years the armies march from south to north and north to south, and there are incredible casualties. It goes back and forth again and again. And oh yes, isn't the question of North Korea also a very interesting hypothetical thought experiment, where we're not questioning whether war would be good or bad, but whether or not it would be possible and at what cost? It seems to be very easy for people to imagine that the United States could suddenly and irresistibly conquer North Korea. And basically anyone who sat down and looked at US military simulations realized that this is not the case. America could conquer North Korea. America could, at tremendous cost. Tremendous cost in fortune and in blood, in casualties, with tremendous consequences. They could do it, but not quickly, not easily. And wouldn't it be different? Wouldn't it be a different question ethically if they could do it quickly and easily, right? And this is how we get to the bottom of the riddle of American imperialism and really the total abject failure of the American empire since the end of World War II. It sounds somewhat surreal. We could actually talk about the failure of the American empire during World War II. It would be another very interesting discussion, how things really went very wrong for America during that period, even though, of course, it's remembered as a great victory. Americans think about politics and think about war as if it is a foregone conclusion, that they have the expertise, that they have the capability to resolve any and all of these conflicts instantaneously with a minimal body count, with minimum consequences in a minimal number of years. And what history has proven to them again and again and again is that that's just not the case. Now, if somebody is in a lot of pain and weeping and yelling, lying on the floor of a train station because they're trying to give birth to a baby, would you run up and help them deliver the baby? You personally? When you got to the front, people ask you, oh, well, why are you trying to help? It's because you're the most compassionate or the most concerned. Would you be willing to lie and say that you're a surgeon when you're not one? See what you're getting here? This question of competence, we think of it in English-speaking Western culture as if it's something amoral, as if it's something separate from and outside of the realm of the ethical question of whether or not one ought to do something. Well, somebody is in pain, whether it's somebody drowning or someone giving birth to a baby, someone ought to help. But the question I'm asking is, should that someone be you? If you have no medical education, if you have no training, if there is the very real possibility that you will make the process of this woman giving birth worse rather than better through your intervention, what then can we say about your moral decision to intervene? Right? So the question of capacity is really the question of competence, even, is inextricably, profoundly bound up in these questions about, military and political decisions. Since World War II ended, did the United States have the competence or the capacity to bring democracy to Cuba? The answer is no. They lost. They failed. How about Haiti? How well did the United States do in Haiti? Have they stabilized Haiti? Have they created democracy in Haiti? And look at it decade by decade since World War II. What happened with U.S. policy in Haiti? How did that go? How about Vietnam? How about Cambodia? How about Myanmar? As we keep going down the list, how about Colombia? How did Colombia work out for the Americans? What we have is one warning after another that the Americans do not have what it takes to resolve any of these conflicts. Now, if there were some tremendously powerful foreign country that could intervene militarily and bring about a total occupation of the island of Cyprus, end the Turkish occupation of half of the island, create a regular democracy with normal elections and human rights, end the crisis on Cyprus once and for all. Should they do it? Yes, they should do it. Is the United States that country? Can the United States do for Cyprus what they did for South Korea? Or would the disaster of American intervention, making an enemy out of Turkey as never before, with all these long-term consequences, possibly resulting in nuclear missiles being fired, one doesn't know. You could come up with a best case scenario and a worst case scenario, right? Or would an American intervention and a war with Turkey, would that turn out as badly as Vietnam? Would that turn out as badly as the wars we've just lived through in Afghanistan and Iraq, where we look back 20 years later, right? This really does come down to the sort of question of, if someone's in pain, if someone is struggling to give birth at a train station or a bus station, it's not the question of whether or not someone should help. The question is, who? And Americans have always lacked the humility to take that look in the mirror and say, it's not me. And if not me, maybe it's you.